Thank you, Mama Mary, for agreeing to be part of this global feminism project. This interview is part of the Global Feminism Project, a multi-site international project sponsored by the University of Michigan. Our goal in undertaking these oral histories is to create and preserve conversation with women whose scholarship and/or activism has contributed to women activism and issues that are important to women. So basically today, our conversation will be around 5 broad topics, including general background about your life and work, your reflection on your work, your thought about the relationship between feminism scholarship and activism, and how you see your work in relation to these practices. Your thought and insight about your work in the context of broadly conceived notion of women movement. And finally, the connection you see, if any, between your work and those of activists in other national settings. So if we start with background about your life, as you think about where you are today, how would you see the journey that brought you to this point? For example, what is the central commitment in your life? What does your career look like? Or what do you consider your most significant lifetime achievement professionally? There you go.
Thank you, and I appreciate and really say thank you for thinking about involving me in this project. I think it's an important project, especially because it's talking about the oral histories of women, and I am one of them. And I think for me, it will even be oral histories because we are talking about our narratives. You know, sometimes when you talk of histories, it's like someone talking on your behalf, and unfortunately, it has always been, you know, men around us who talks on my story of life and how I feel it career-wise and how I connect to the women's movement. It's sometimes about institutions. Yeah, the whole narrative is healized. So I'm happy, and I'm happy to be part of this her story because I'm breaking the narrative myself. I'm breaking the myth that the narrative can be owned by me. So starting with my background and the kind of questions you are raising, I would say quickly that my name is Mary Rusimbi. I was born, I think now 68 years ago. And so I'm not a young one, but also I'm still around and I'm still developing my career and learning and unlearning as I go through. And I have learned a lot in my life, basically from the beginning of living in a family of 7, because I'm the eldest and a young girl then, but now, you know, the first daughter. So you can imagine 6 siblings. So I was given the support, especially from my father and my family and my grandmother, to be able to really already see that I have a role in the society, I have a role in my community, but I also have a role of developing myself in a way that I will be able to contribute to the roles I was given. So several things happened that time. I won't go into details, but the first thing that happened was more about learning and developing kind of a capacity to understand from a very early age that I'm a leader and that I needed to work with people around me, that you shouldn't be a lone leader. But I also think of how through that kind of family background, I had an opportunity to go up to the university level, which many African or Tanzanian women would not have that opportunity. But you know, I grew around when Nyerere was our president, Mwalimu Nyerere, who had Ujamaa or socialism as a philosophy that brought me to education system and exposure that talked about people around you, communities, that even if you are learned up to what level, you should not forget that you have to contribute back to the community. So through that philosophy and support from I always mention my father more. My mother, unfortunately, we know the patriarchy around her. She was very traditional. She was at some point saying, you should not continue with school. You should be married. And my father, who was more exposed and maybe he was already a public servant, brought back and tried to make me and my mother understand that this is not about you as a girl, it's about you as a person. Mary has to grow. So I went through and I have a master's degree. And I was actually hired first in an academic institution, which is called the Institute of Adult Education. I was training diploma for adult education sector people. And through that and so many other processes, you get to see that you need to be yourself professional, but you need to use that professionalism or academic gains which you have gained through the society to go back. So my life really, since I was at the university, I was here, I was looking for a kind of specialization that will help me connect to the communities. And somehow when I started working with adult education and going out more and more to the communities, like working with both men and women, there was a realization which was not really well articulated within myself. There was a realization that there was something that was missing more for women than for men adults. For example, accessing adult education, though the government policies then and system were about reaching out to both men and women, but underlying there was some cultural and sometimes just patriarchy, power relations, which did not allow the majority of women to really gain what the policy was saying, because the policy was saying adult education. We are then talking more of adult education was as an asset to any adult. So it should be accessible to both men and women. But we know women have to go out and fetch, firewood and all those things. And the adult education classes was in the evening. So already the planning part of it was not accessing many of them who would run back to do the family calls, which are very important. But then also you could see the kind of content which was in this syllabus were mostly the he standard. It was talking about a farmer who is a man. So there were things that were conscientizing me without even going out and getting some specialization in gender issues, in understanding that there is a gap between men and women. But again, fortunately, professional opportunities in this area came when in 1990, I think it was 1988, I was one of those very few scholars from the country who was given scholarships to go out to the UK. It was just a 6 months course, but it was on gender development. And it really, really gave me the tools, the relevant tools which are needed for understanding what I was struggling with, for understanding from the beginning of my family life, why were the boys given more support by the communities than girls. So it made me have tools which I came back with into the country. And somehow this also, again, shaped my professional route. And I became more and more into understanding and believing that women needed to be placed centrally. And when I say women, I mean adult women and young women, to be placed centrally in our country's policies, budgets, but also they needed to have support to be able to develop agency for organizing, which is somehow led to women's movement exposure, for organizing and transforming their own unequal situations. So in that sense, I somehow became a part of someone who worked with funders to support the agenda program officers for some years, but something was still telling me inside me that you are not yet there. Your career is not here. So you are just collecting some experiences, contributing at this point. So I left the government, I left the funders program. I was then gender program officer, where I also gained a lot and also contributed in conscientizing the system within our donor funding mechanism, but as well as the government, on why women's agenda has to be centralized in there. So then I went to work with NGOs. I went to work with NGOs, and this is where I think my career into becoming feminist and becoming a community person, you know, really who works with women at different levels at both national as well as here, but bringing them to a point where we both come together and say collectively, we want to be there so that our voices are heard. And also we want to be able to become active in influencing situations around us. And so I became quite feminist in that sense of the word. Of course, you go out, you learn, you unlearn. A lot of programs around me that supported me to get to that level. But I also became a movement building person, if I can say so. So this is where I am. And I'm now working with an organization that I can talk more about.
Okay. Thank you, Mama Mary, for sharing that with us. The second part is a bit overlapping with what you have mentioned a bit, but I'll want to hear more from you. Background about your work. What drew you to the work you do or have done? How did you first come to be involved in the work in this area you have mentioned? How has this involvement changed over time? And has your work changed in ways that have been shaped the experience from your own life? And have you experienced any personal changes as a result of the engagement in feminist academic work or activism?
Maybe what I would start with before I even go to my work, I think throughout, as I was trying to become a feminist and play a key role in women's movement, as I will talk more, and the work I do, I had an opportunity to be exposed to writing papers and in that sense becoming academic, but connecting my academia contributions to the community. So I've always been one of those people who would sit and reflect with other like-minded personalities, but also groups and organizations. I will always be someone who will be involved in inputting into putting up feminist position papers, into putting out how women should improve more in organizing, in mobilizing, and so on and so forth. But now I just want to go back to my work. I've started a bit from the first question that I found myself becoming an active feminist and a movement builder through my job in the first NGO, which I was a founder member as well as the first executive director, by the name of Tanzania Gender Networking Program. This was a very strong initiative that was combining policy advocacy at the national level and outreaching and organizing, supporting outreaching and organizing at the local level, where women and men sometimes who are really also suffering a lot from patriarchy were coming together, doing a lot of training, supporting fundraising for them, organizing, exposing them to much more broader-based ideological discourses, including not only looking at their own agenda that women are denied this, are denied, connecting it to the broader exploitative systems globally as well as nationally. So through that NGO where I was heading, and I stayed there for 10 years before I changed to the current job where I am, I did a lot, you know, in collaboration with my colleague, but I'm talking of my leadership role there, where it was about really looking at the vision we had as the organizations of saying we want to grow more into feminist beings and institution, but we don't want to be isolated from the community. So how do you go back in a humble way and really become just a facilitator or enabler to that particular? And here my background in adult education assisted me, because you know the principles there, the philosophy is about who are you to be able to judge others, to be able to say, and that background and feminism combined really gave me a lot of good exposure learning, but also contributing. So in that sense, we would organize, we would support communities around us, women communities, and other like-minded people who are disadvantaged in different ways, in their disaggregation, the disabled, the people who are oriented in a way that people in Tanzania don't think sexually they should be oriented, and all those kind of groups. We would have reflection systems with them, sessions. They would come out with solutions, and some of the solution was like, we want to influence the public policy, so that this public policy can be able to return resources back to us. And this is where, for example, one of the key things I can talk about as an achievement in this area of my work was we, as the TGNP, and me as then the executive director for 10 years, leading a campaign around so many other campaigns, but I'll talk about this one, about making the government, our own government, being able to see the potential of starting an initiative we called, and we still call, gender budgeting, meaning centralizing their planning processes, their budgeting processes at both the national and local level, so that it brings in women's voices. And when you say women's voices, we mean women's issues. For example, we are able with the communities, collectively, able to really make our government see that this is an important contribution to the development. So they used us as technical people. They used us as feedback mechanism, where we organized communities to be able to say, is this year's or 3 years budget really, reaching me or not? And women would come out and they would say, no, it did not reach us, because we still have one small clinic where we have to walk and walk to get access of health services. We still have to fetch water that time. We still have, and then that one we will articulate, and this is where the academia thing comes in. We'll push in an analysis and put it in a policy position papers, and also go out with a voice from the communities and advocate for these issues which women have raised. Meaning, we are demanding governments then to be able to increase budget to where women's needs are. That was one thing. But the second thing which really opened up the government, as well as myself and others in the learning process, is the fact that we assumed too much, even women ourselves, that budgets just was like, neutral. It really went out, and the amount which is brought out from the government allocations will automatically go to the sectors. So there was a lot of issues of transparency, and doing a lot of research and analysis on who is reached and who is not, why, and sending these feedback to the government. And in that process, we really made the government listen to us. And that was my first, another big achievement, listen to us. But the third related achievement is the way this budget now was made so, and prepared and made so transparent to an ordinary woman. When we meet this woman, we'll say, yeah, but the budget of this year, which was supposed to go out to bring out at an additional water outlet, it did not come. So then we'll support them to say, go to your village government and let the voice come out. And there are a lot of those kind of gains. And in that process, Tanzania then became very popular. We were called regionally, internationally, to go out to support other governments and other activists and feminists and women's movements to be able to bring this approach. Unfortunately, it is there, but it's not as active as it was, because we know the changes of government and so many other policy changes, but it's still a big central issue in the women's movement setting. So that is where I stayed for 10 years, doing a lot of other things, including connecting to feminist spaces globally, regionally. We did a lot, and I provided a lot of leadership around Beijing processes, follow-up of Beijing processes. We went out with the SADC sisters and made the SADC protocol, gender SADC protocol come out, which was really giving a lot of not only Tanzanian women, but also the regional, the Southern African region, women opportunities to be able to hold their government accountable in several areas, including political leadership, where they said, for example, that 30% of the parliament and the local government will always have women as a slot. We went out and made it even 50. There are a lot of advocacy and those kind of organizing, while we also see how we connect that to the local level, so that we are not going out to a meeting in a region without participation of few or fewer, depending on the budget, but also, even if it wasn't about participation, it was about going back to them, getting how they see what we are proposing with these structures, whether it is at the regional level. For example, we also did a lot at the African level to follow up on AU, which also brought in a gender protocol that brought the quota of 30% to 50. We're still struggling with that, but it gives you an accountability tool or a handle to be able to do your advocacy with a structured way, because you always go to the government and say, you signed here, you committed yourself. They did a lot, including reproductive rights, where abortion, for example, where then through the both, I think it's SADC gender protocol as well as the AU, it's well articulated. Our rights are well articulated. And these ones we connect to the global, where, for example, CEDAW has been talking a lot about this for years. So how do we bring it down through this regional and national? At the national level, we also did a lot of lobbying, if you can call it so, organizing to bring our voice into the issues of where the 30%, where the 50%, and this is an ongoing process, but at least the constitution clause, one of the constitution clause allows for, you know, special seats, but if we are not satisfied with that, we want more than special seats, we want 50-50. So just a few years ago, through my new organizations, which I'll talk just quickly about it, we as Women Fund Tanzania, this organization I'm leading now, we organized when the government was actually reviewing its constitution. We organized a huge platform, which to me is women's movement building, huge platform in the country where we had women politicians, NGOs, individual women, communities, people coming from economic platform at the local level, and disabled, and it was a huge platform. And we made a dent, much as we still have to see its implementation and the operationalization results in a big way. But we made a big thing of putting in our own narrative of what we want to see in the new constitution. And this new constitution, which is a big achievement, which I personally contributed, but it was a huge platform of all of us. It brought out 10 critical principles that should be brought out to the new constitution with women's perspective. So we brought in issues of safety for women, reproductive rights. We brought in political participation, and through that process, though somehow the government stopped it, what I think is a big achievement was the conscientization of the women, both at the national and the local level, and the learning, the collective learning we did. Some of the women were saying to us, I don't even know what this constitution was about, but now I know. So I know I will ask my member of parliament that when you go there, ask for this. So there was a lot of conscientization, learning together, but also strengthening the women's movement, which is a big contribution in this country. And I think we've documented that process, and our stories are there from our own eyes. We did not allow the he's to talk on our behalf. We did not allow the is to write our story. So that story is great milestone that shows out that there is a women's movement in the country and we need to work. But quickly, to just finalize where I am at the moment, I'm still an active member of Tanzania Gender Networking, my first organization. But after 10 years, I felt like I needed something different. At personal level, professional, academic, So I said, I'll still be part and parcel of this very important organ in our women's movement. I'll still do a lot with them because I'm sometimes in their board, sometimes a member. But I felt like I needed to move on. So I shifted a bit, not moving from the women's movement because that's part and parcel of my life, but I shifted being in an NGO and going out and becoming among the two of us as founders of a national women rights fund, which is known as Women Fund Tanzania. Now we have turned ourselves into Women Fund Tanzania Trust. We used to be Women Fund. And here is us, and especially me, playing a key role as a founder with no funding. Because when you talk of fund, you have to have huge fund. With no funding, with no really big experience of how a national funding will function, because this is the first and it's the only so far, women feminist fund in the country. There are several few others from the civil society funds, but they are not feminist enough. But we also had seen a gap where, although these mechanisms are there, bilateral funding is coming into the country, women organizing their initiatives within the women's movement space were not reached much by the funding that is coming from the bilaterals. And there are some studies that show that. I'm not just talking from the air. My son Rusimbi. Sorry. And then there was also a way of showing that even when the funding was going out, the little which was going out, it wasn't really reaching out the women at the community level, because their capacity in writing proposals, their capacity in articulating in a way that, a funder will say, yeah, this is a feminist conscious initiative, I want to support it. So less and less went into them. And so this Women Fund, ours, came out with those kind of situational gaps, as well as no funding. And on the no funding, I remember a friend of mine, globally, we meet on things like talking about global feminist agenda. She said, Mary, what are you going to do after you take away yourself from TGNP? I said, well, I'm going to start a National Women Fund. Very proudly, she said, God, are you crazy? You know what it means, fundraising at this age, blah, 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 blah. I said, well, it's an agenda, it's a dream. So let me try. We shall collect voices from others, and we shall leave it for others to carry it forward. And that is exactly what I did. I went in with a colleague of mine, Maria Terile, and we started a fund with no funds. And we really made it big, big, big. Now it's a recognized national feminist fund. It is very well connected in the country with the women's movement, because that's our agenda, the agenda we support. And then it's also connected regionally. It's connected so much globally to global feminist agenda platforms and processes. Like we are part of global women rights funds all over. We are part of networks like the Global Fund for Women in Africa, IWDF, and so on and so forth. So I've been around in that organization, starting it very small, but now it has grown with staff. So one of my personal achievement I see from my present is being able to really persevere and make the dream come true.
Wow.
Now, come true, because at least we have an institution that we will always go through challenges, but there are also opportunities we use. And it is a national feminist fund that has been one of the key sources of sending out 3 products, if I can call them so. One of the products is the funding itself. We have a way and a mechanism of still being transparent, of still being working under integrity cycles, but being able to make it simpler and supportive so that it reaches women we were targeting. And these are really my community. In my grant-making portfolio, 60% of the funding is going out to this small scale. And I tell you, it's a big deal to support small organizing groups and initiatives because of the capacity issues, because of distance, but that is where we are, because that's what we wanted. The 40% out of the grant-making portfolio is directed towards the national level networks, the advocates, the feminists who are already out there, but then we need that connectivity. We need to see how the national level organizations support and work and listen to the voice from the communities. So this is one of our critical roles, and I feel proud about that. This is a product, but also in the process, you become part of someone who has to produce conceptual clarity, you know, I can call it leadership at different levels. You know, sometimes just seeing that there are gaps here, putting up some learning sessions and trying to bring them and to bring the, especially the community level groups to a level where they can really link their agenda to the national level agenda. But the second product we always do, we call it supportive capacity enhancement. And if I can say so, something that we go along with. It's not like any funder where after you have submitted a proposal and it has been, accepted or approved, then it's like just go on your own and bring us a report. There is a lot of accompaniment support and services we provide, which is what we are trying to say, address the issue of capacity so that we can have more active feminists and women rights actors at the community level. Otherwise, we'll always say they've no capacity. And then we as women feminists become part of voicing out that very negative narrative. They have no capacity, so no funding should go to them. You have to. So a lot of, when I say accompaniment and capacity, is about supporting them to become more feminist conscious in their own agenda, to set their own agenda, to write proposal, practical needs, as well as how just to put up mentorship in their programs, to be able to think of how to transit leadership in their own so that they don't die. And also protecting them. For example, during the COVID, we had a lot of support going out to them as part of this product of accompaniment. So we go along with them. We don't just say, bring us report, and we support them where there are some gaps. And the third product, which is also an objective of our fund, is about saying, we do all this for what? We do all this so that they can become active actors and agents within the women's movement. Because unfortunately, because of several reasons, the women's movement, though critical it is, however, we have a bit of gaps here and there. Some of the gaps is also to fund long-term processes which will build feminist conscious movements, because sometimes you just get one proposal, you can't build movements with such. So we provide long-term support, long-term funding, but also to make sure that we have a feminist conscious movement that is inclusive, in the sense that it brings different voices, including the movement, including young ones, including disabled, including sexual-oriented people in different ways. But the second thing is that we need a women's movement that is already strengthened in its agenda, so that it knows what it wants to transform. And sometimes you'll be surprised that everyone talks about, I'm working on reducing or addressing issues of gender-based violence, but sometimes the approaches and all those related things are not really articulated with a feminist approach. So they go on disempowering the same women they want to support. So the idea is that you support the movement to be able to really get into a way that they know that their own agenda, they set their own agenda, but from a feminist conscious point of view. And if you are feminist conscious, you'll always look up for some other people like-minded to work with, which means the collective part of it. But we also look not only at inclusiveness agenda, we look at the feminists we contribute towards. How do we make our women's movement spaces work with intersectionality approach, the cross-border movement, so that the reproductive health activists or feminists or movement do not work on their own. And they're talking of the same rights anyway. They're talking of access, abortion, safety, and so on and so forth. And here women rights, on the other hand, where they call them, I work in this and this, they don't see that as their agenda. So the cross-border. For example, now we are supporting a very big and growing campaign, which is very cross-border, looking at all sectors and bringing them together. We call it anti-sextortion, anti-sexual corruption, agenda in the country, where it brings in labor movements, it brings in young girls' voice, it brings community voices, it brings a lot of us. And we say, let's collectively articulate what we want out of this and the connection between a woman who is working on GBV and those who are working on reproductive rights when it comes to sexual corruption, because it's a huge problem that we are discovering every day, that it's killing the dignity of women and girls, going out to get health services. Someone saying, yeah, I'll give you, because you have no money, give me sex in exchange, or someone in the government who is very professionally equipped, and someone who is in power would say, I can't give you this job until you become my sex slavery girl, and all those kind of things. So then we collectively work on what we want out of this. Then we go and work with the government in influencing it. And as I'm talking here, this is one of the campaigns that has been really having huge influence into the government processes already. Like we made a research together where we also talk about knowledge needed, from the academia point of view to the women's movement, to be able to bring out data, but also to be able to bring out an analysis from a feminist perspective that will be able to break myths, around sexual corruption, because even some women would think, yeah, but what can I do? And then the men will say, it's also, let's look at how the victims come to us. That's not the issue. There is some inequality of power there. And you need some studies, you need some analysis to be able to bring those to the movement and the advocacy work we are doing. So I'm now currently the Executive Director of Women Fund Tanzania, but I'm almost going out. I'm transiting. I have a plan which my board has already accepted, and we are trying to hire in a feminist way someone who will take you over. I'll still be in the board. I'll still be part of parcel, but to say the truth, women's movement agenda is about me, and I'll always be there even when I'm out of these institutions because of my age and others. I'll be writing, I'll be connecting, I'll be trying to be part and parcel of supporting organizations, including my own organizations. I'm thinking of moving towards, you asked me something about your goal. I'm thinking of moving towards supporting two levels. One level is where I become a resource, whether paid or not paid for, of supporting organizations to transit in a way that will not kill our organizations. So it's a whole program which I'm going to do after I come out next year, early next year from my organization, the current one. We are actually in the process of really having someone take over, and I'm going to become a co-executive director between now, October, we are having her, up to March 31st, where then I'll just shift from being in a regular working hours and coming out. And the idea is to have a resource center, community-based center. My children are like, oh, you are starting again to start another organization. I say, no, this will be an initiative, but it's somewhere where I'll connect to the movement. I'll connect to the women's feminist agenda. I'll contribute a bit of the experience I've gained, because I've also learned a lot I've gained. So I have an obligation to return this to the women's movement, where, for example, I'm thinking of specializing in supporting them to have what I can call transiting initiatives within the organization to resource mobilize for them, and to be able to bring the young voice more to the women rights and feminist movements. But the second one is to say, I've worked at the global level, the national level, this level. I needed to go back and look at my own community, which is where I live. And this is why I call it Resource Center. It will be a center where women, ordinary women, apart from me becoming part of the broader women's movement on the issues I'm raising here, trying to see how together we can actually work and have our own resource center within my vicinity. So you can see, I'm not going out of the women's movement in a day, but I'll be here and I'll be contributing, but in a different way. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mama Mary. That is very insightful. If you move to the second one, the relationship between feminism scholarship and activism. How do you perceive the relationship between scholarship and activism in general and in your own work? Partly you have mentioned, but you can give us some more.
I've mentioned, maybe I'll just summarize. First
Okay.
of all, I believe that, you know, our advocates' work need to be informed and connected quite effectively with the other side. You cannot have women's movement, whether feminists or not, women rights organizations, whether at the institutional level or not, without really, like I said before, having a contribution from the academia. So I think that is important. We, in the beginning of our activism, some like 20 years ago, I think we never had this good connection. So it started coming to all of us that you can never be a feminist and take yourself away from being analytical, being able to collect data for evidence, being able to be, at some point, an activist yourself. And this is where I think this gap has to be filled more and more. We need more people who come from, you know, that's other side, who also understands what is happening. Not only to be doing research and to be doing, you know, writing of papers at this side, which is so kind of divorced from what is happening at the community level. So how do you balance? We know that there have to be roles. So I think, to me, is having a strategy that, first of all, a strategy that recognizes that we need each other. The activists needed to be able to connect it, you know, to the academia, to the excellency, to the, whoever you call them, professional, people who write, people who do research, people who bring out evidence out, and so on and so forth. This understanding is not coming by its own. It somehow needs some leadership. And I think if I can use examples around my own country, some few years ago, we as women activists and feminist women's movement actors, we were doing a lot on promoting land rights. And there was a legal piece coming from the government, you know, a policy and a legal frame that was going to the parliament with so much gender blindness. So we, the women rights activists, we already organized, we were going this and this, but we knew that we articulated and planned and knew that we needed to work with academias who were researchers, who were people who were doing a lot of analytical work. So we went out and approached them. But you see, for them, then I'm talking, it wasn't a big deal, because it was like, I'm doing academia research, I'm doing this. So the connection, like I say, was weak. But then they became part and parcel of our movements. Not all of them, but a lot of them. And the additional value we got as activists from there was really data, was something that we have so analytically done and with our voice, so that we had issues that were supported by data. And we won quite a lot through the legal frame, which was approved at the board level, where, for example, women were recognized for the first time as equal owners of land, and so many other ingredients which came out of that. So to me, at a personal level, I do not divorce, you know, being an academia and being an activist. When I say academia, being someone who brings in the intellectual support to the movement, and also learn what the movement is always doing. Because if you are just sitting there, the intellectualism will be very theoretical. You'll be talking about, you'll write good papers, you'll write analysis, you'll write whatever it is, research and so on. That is not connected to what is the reality at the ground. And I think without feeling that and making a bridge work, you know, even the women's movement agenda will not go far. Because we all know that this world, with no evidence, if you just say, there is a lot of violence in my country, and this is the kind of violence in my country, someone will ask you, especially the public policy people, where are you coming from? Where did you get this? Our data says this. So we need to be able to influence that particular intellectualism which is generated from the other side. Unfortunately, not much connected, but we need to bring the bridge more and more closer. So for myself, I become part of an academia in that sense of the word, where we do a lot of research. I become a researcher, I become a policy analyst, I become data collector, I become this, but I do not leave my connection with what then that data tells me and how it can help now in addressing the issues the women organizing spaces in the women's movement are working on. So to me, it's a very key, critical need of coming together more and more. Even if we have not done like 100%, we need to do more in that area. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Mama Mary. Now come to the intersection of your work with the women's movement in the country and globally.
Yeah.
What is your analysis, evaluation, expectation of the development of feminism in this country? Or what is your relationship with other women's organizations in this country, with other activists? How do you think about your work in relation to women's movement?
I think I've been mentioning in my background and also in the kind of questions, the previous questions you've been asking me, but I'll just sum up again. I think to me, throughout, I have never separated my work with the women rights movement or the feminist conscious movement, whether within the country, regionally, or globally. I've always connected. And this is because the agenda, which I personally, or the institutions which I've been working, or even the current institution I'm working with, is about feminism and women's movement building. The processes which we've been adapting through campaigns, through coming together collectively, through always thinking that you can never work this thing alone and succeed. To me, that's already the approaches. So the approaches of supporting coalitions, the approach of supporting women to come together just for learning, articulating and agreeing on an agenda point that will be sent out here and there. The areas we work with of funding those coalition at the current, I'm doing a lot of that. We are funding like 4 or 5 coalitions, but several other growing coalitions. You know, we are funding the anti-extortion, anti-sexual corruption coalition in Tanzania. We are funding women leadership and constitutional issues, which is a huge, movement throughout the country, and which came through, like I was talking of the review of the constitution in 1995 up to 1993, 4 until now. We are funding, like platforms which should bring the intersectionality. For example, the reproductive rights and the women's rights, there is an emerging platform there. There's an emerging platforms around gender and issues of environmental justice, and it has been with us for some years. So these are like efforts, very concrete efforts of say, if you want to invest in the women's movement to grow, you need to look at this platform. You need to look at the intersectionality. You need to support them to grow an agenda that is not separated conceptually, but that is seen like a holistic way, that a woman, whether you are working on aspects of GBV, will suffer, the environmental justice will suffer this. So how do we bring that together? And so I think to me, it has always been there. In my organization, like I said before, one of its key of the 3 or 4 objectives, that is one, to contribute to strengthening the women's movement agenda. Myself, I've been a player all over the place. But if I was to talk of the region and the global, myself as well as including the institution I'm working on, we have never been absent in the spaces, in the conversation, in the contributions. And this has started many years ago in this country, several before us, but I would like to talk where I have played a more proactive role. You know, the Beijing preparations. It's a women's movement agenda that was articulated in my own country first, where we went out and brought in voices of the local women. What is it we sent to Beijing? We did not just take some few of us who were fortunately able to participate in the Beijing processes. We did not just go like that. There was a huge in-country process that we facilitated, that we supported, and I was so happy to be part of that. I was younger, but I was still active. We go to the villages, we listened to women, and we articulated key critical issues from our own perspective as Tanzania, being the economic part, the economic empowerment, political participation, empowerment for women, issues of women in the media, and several things. And we then connected to the regional agenda. I was also lucky to be part of articulation now as SADC region, as East African regions, where the voice of women from Tanzania were able to go through and say, now these are regional Beijing platform agenda, which you want to send to Beijing. Then we went as Africa. Femnet was organizing all of us in Africa to be able to articulate critical agenda for the Beijing platform that will go into Beijing platform of action, and which all the governments of this globe will sign. And we did that. And one of the things I remember that was big issue for us as African was the young girls, agenda within the movement. So there's a empowering young girls, and it became part of that. Then we went to the global, but that's just one example where you connect the local to the regional, to the global. But all my life and my organization, for that matter, we have been part and parcel of global discourses. And as I'm talking, I can give an example where as National Women Fund, we are part of an African women funds platform, which do a lot of articulating our collective agenda, of seeing how we move forward and how we support each other. And also sharing experiences, which has worked, which has not worked. And then we have, we become as African women funds networks, we have become part of global spaces, like I was mentioning before, where we have a platform run by Prospera. Prospera is like an international network for women funds and feminist funds globally, where we meet others. We share about resources, where to get it, where not. We share about putting our voice as women funds. So to me, it has always been part and parcel of my life, but also part and parcel wherever I go with an institution, that you cannot disconnect the national agenda with the regional agenda. And when I say region, it's African agenda, and bring in the solidarity part, because women's movement at the end of the day is also about solidarity. It's also about the sisterly support we get from each other. It's not only about are you having a collective agenda? No, there's more about how we relate and learn from each other. And also becoming part of this is becoming more and more conscious as a feminist, how I should behave at personal level. And you asked me something about how has it transformed you. Indeed, it has transformed me. And it has even transformed in my family, though they don't really talk much about it, but you can see patterns of transformation. You can also see how when I touch base with some communities, people, we transform as well as I support in contributing towards their transformation. So being a feminist within these spaces has made me more conscious of who I am, what I want to contribute into this world and communities, but more on how we have to do these things more collectively and in a feminist way.
Thank you so much, Mama Mary. In finishing, connection to international forms of activism and scholarship. I'm sure you've said much of that, but if you have something more to add, do you have any connection with other activists, scholars, organizations in other countries? How did this connection come about? What have they meant for your work? How do you make sense of differences and similarities in the kinds of issues raised or approaches taken by these activists, scholars, and organizations?
First of all, I've talked a bit more around how I am part and parcel of different, and maybe I should talk more of the scholarly part of it, and maybe it can say also how you are connected. I've been talking before about my work, whether I'm an activist, an organizer at the community level, through institutions as well as individual. I've always connected it to people who work and produce intellectualism in this area of women's rights agenda, feminist rights agenda. And I've been part of broader research, part of training together with others, part of articulating how we move forward, and just want to pick two examples. One of the examples how through the gender budget work to date, I've become part and parcel of people who are forming academia cycles around what is all writing a lot about gender budgeting, writing a lot about feminism, writing a lot, not only writing, researching, data sharing, attending conversations, attending conferences, international conferences, regional conferences, which somehow brings a lot of conceptual clarity and sometimes also ideological clarity. And I've also been part of writing with some sisters in the region. For example, through my gender budgeting work, I've worked a lot with people like, I remember the name now of my sister from South Africa, Madlenda, and also connected to the feminist economists, led by Annie and others who have been really working on articulating not only the practical part of it, but the intellectual part of our women's movement, of the agenda we are supporting, how it's working, how it's not working. And so in that sense, I've been inspired, I've been learning, I've been contributing what I have, and contributing an African voice to some of the global intellectual processes and spaces. And this is not only around gender budgeting, it has been about so many other things, the informal sector. I remember me and Professor Ruth Meena being part of the global research, which was talking about the African informal sector and how women are part and parcel of part and parcel of being, really challenged by, just to be specific, by challenged in the area of cross-border, trading, East Africa, the whole region, Africa, we sent it out to the global, and so many other academia processes. And I think some other things which I would want to understand, to really bring out more, is the bringing into this intellectual spaces and sisterhood and other things we've been doing, the local voice. For example, I remember there was some few years back where we had a huge campaign as global activists, but also African women activists. And this was not all about only women, it was about civic, actors all over the globe, where we were working with international actors, African actors, and ourselves. And this was when we were carrying forward a campaign around 50 years of the World Bank. And IMF is enough in our countries. We want them out because there was a lot of analysis, which also contributed a lot in terms of writing, in terms of data, in terms of collecting what the women's voices are from here. What are they really getting or gaining in terms of lobbying our governments and so on. And this was like a global campaign. And our role there were like 3. And I was part of that, which shows that my connection there. One of them was to become part of researches and analysis which are ongoing, to be able to bring out how the IMF and the World Bank 50 years was not working for us. It was just exploitative. It was, forming partnership with our governments, and it was killing us in the health sector and others, and bringing evidence. And that was our second contribution. Bring evidence from Africa, bring evidence from Africa. We'll do research, local research, sometimes in connection with others from the region and from the international, and bring out. But where did we go? Collective activism. And that was a great example of how intellectualism really connected to organizing. Because then, for example, with all this data, we were trying globally, organizing ourselves. We were trying to influence the World Bank leadership as well as WTO leadership, because there was also a lot of the connections of this new infrastructure, which was just there to lead our governments into becoming more and more, people who are going with the whims of what the global white or the global north wanted from the government point of view. So I remember being called in one day, Mary, get into the plane with colleagues from the northern hemisphere. Come with evidence. We have an opportunity to talk to the WTO. And this Mary will quickly go into the flight, which is connected on the way because the ticket has to go this. I go to Geneva, we have a meeting. They use, the platform from the Northern Hemisphere, use me or the people from other parts of Africa as a voice from the Southern. So with the evidence, with the analysis we have, the globe and us become one, collective. We want to influence you. I remember going to, and even my colleagues from Africa and TGNP particularly, sending them all the way to influence the board of the World Bank, where you sit outside globally with other actors and trying to make noise, this, until they say, what is it you want to tell us? It is not working, your policies are not working in Africa, but that is well informed from, academia, researches, professional this, and we use evidence from the Southern Hemisphere to show them. So to me, those were years which you could see really intellectualism connecting to activism. We worked together. It has weakened a bit, the global and us. We are trying to activate it in their own regions, Africa, this. The global with the women funds, that's something else. I'm talking of the global activism that is informed and supported by people who are academia, who are coming from supporting the movement, global movement. We need global movements more and more from an intellectual point of view. Yes.
Thank you so much, Mama Mary, for your time. This was very insightful. And we are finished for today. Thank you. Unless you have anything else to add into this.
Well, I just wish to see the final piece of all this when it comes, because I think, like I said, it's a critical area that we need to invest more and to build on what is already there and move on. So all the best.
Thank you so much again. Asante sana.
Haya, nakushukuru. Utaedit huko unachotaka.
Asante. Okay.